Alright guys, first of all I want to say thank you for taking your time staying after school today. I know that it's the last week of school, everybody's ready to get out of here, I am too, but I'm really excited about the information that I have to share with you today. I am in the process of obtaining my master's degree from Kingsville University, and within that process we are asked to complete what's called an action research project. This is a 6-week project, and I've chosen a strategy to implement within my classroom. While I've been implementing that strategy, I have collected data, analyzed that data, and I'm really excited to share the results with you all. I think that this is something that we can implement within our school, within our district, and it is something that's really going to help some of our non-readers really grasp the concept of reading. So I took some time and I implemented daily independent reading into my classroom, and I know some of you all that have been around the education world, you hear those 3 words, daily independent reading, and you automatically are like, no, that's not allowed. For years, administrators have said, no, just reading in the classroom. But this project that I've completed and the results that I've gotten have shown that some daily independent reading time can be healthy for our students. As educators, we're all faced with the issue of students who do not like to read. Okay, I'm a reading teacher. I know some of you all teach different content areas, but as a reading teacher, I see it every day. They hate reading. They don't want to read. They can't find anything that they like to read. So it's a challenge. You know, I love to read. I loved to read when I was in school. So some days it's really hard for me to talk to those students about why they don't like to read because I just love it. But a lot of times we have to instill that excitement and those different things within them because they don't have that starting out. Not only do we spend time convincing them that it's important, but like I said earlier, we also spend time trying to convince administrators and principals and superintendents and people outside of the classroom that giving students time to read is very sacred. A lot of students don't like to read, mainly because when they're asked to read, it's for class. It's for an assignment. They never have the opportunity to take time out to just read because they want to find the enjoyment in reading. So it's very hard to convince people of that, and that is the main reason why I wanted to complete this study, because I wanted to see, you know, is this time really valuable? I've argued for a long time that it is very valuable and it's very crucial that our students have that time, but I had no real data to back it up. And so that's why I chose this topic. My actual research question was, what is the effect of implementing 10 minutes of daily reading on student achievement in the area of vocabulary acquisition? We all know as educators, whether we teach science or math or reading, that vocabulary is the basis of all subjects. It is very important that students know vocabulary, that they can identify vocabulary, and so when students have a great groundwork or foundation of those vocabulary skills, it's very easy to build on the other skills, whether it be in reading or in math or science or things like that. So I wanted to see, would this 10 minutes every day affect their vocabulary skills? It was based on the theory that this 10 minutes can increase their vocabulary. When students are given just 10 minutes a day to read for enjoyment, there's no questions asked after the reading, there's no assignment to go with the reading, they're literally just given 10 minutes to read, then we know that they're introduced to more words than they normally would be without those 10 minutes. A study completed in 2006 points out that adding 10 minutes of reading can increase a student's exposure to print. They gave an example in the study that a student at the 30th percentile, which we know a lot of those students within our district, we see those students every day, if they spend an extra 10 minutes on a book, they will read around 700,000 words each year. Just 10 minutes. Okay, that's all we're asking for is 10 minutes. 700,000 words each year, and that is surpassing the amount of reading done currently by students at the 70th percentile. And this was a game changer for me because, to me, in the world that we live in, 10 minutes is really fast. 10 minutes goes by like that. If I can't have more than 10 minutes to do something, normally I push it off to do it later because I don't think that you can get anything accomplished in 10 minutes. But this study showed us that, just 10 minutes, if students would sit down and read for 10 minutes, that it increases their print exposure drastically. And if we're increasing their print exposure, we're increasing their exposure to vocabulary and new words and new concepts. And so when I was doing my research for the project before I began to implement my own, I was really excited about this information that I found because it already was giving me a backing to what I wanted to prove. This is just a short overview of the project. I'm not going to go into a lot of the details, but I will kind of give you an overview so that you know kind of how things worked. It was very simple to incorporate into my classroom. Students were asked to bring a book. I did not tell them what book to bring. It could be a book from the library. They could bring a magazine, the newspaper. They could check a book out from my library. I didn't tell them what reading level it had to be on, just had to have some kind of reading material every day when they came into class. This was a time where students had the choice to read whatever they liked, like I said, which is very rare in classrooms today. If students did not have a book, they had the option to check out a book. When they entered the classroom, they finished their bell work, and that's something that I continued. That's a strategy that I've used in my classroom, and I didn't want to take away from that, so I just added the 10 minutes after bell work. So we still did bell work, and the students automatically knew, as soon as your bell work is finished, find a spot to read. I'm currently doing flexible seating in my classroom, so students have the choice to sit in a desk, at a table, in the floor, on a beanbag, things like that. So they knew that they could find anywhere in the room to read. And once everyone was situated and I seen that everyone was ready to start, I would start my timer. And as the process went on, I really wouldn't even have to start my timer. The kids got in such a good flow of bell work, knowing where to go, getting their book, starting to read, that we literally could have operated without the timer, which I loved. Everyone was engaged for those 10 minutes. When the timer sounded, students completed the daily chart, which is just a chart that asks them, what are you reading and how many pages did you read? There were no type of questions. They didn't have to write a summary. They were just logging what they had read for the day, so I could kind of get a good view of who was reading, how much, and things like that. Those are collected at the end of each week, like I said, so that I could see, so-and-so was reading this many pages, or so-and-so is reading this many pages, and I could see, if we've been on the same 5 pages for 3 days, then, we may need to have a chat. Within my study, I also included a control group. This group continued class as normal. I did not implement the 10 minutes of reading. They completed their bell work. We continued on with class. I chose to use a control group because I not only wanted to be able to look at the growth that my experimental group would see, but I also wanted to see how was not getting that 10 minutes of reading affecting my students. And I also wanted to be able to compare the data between the two. The intervention is appropriate to the research question because at the end of the 6-week time frame, students completed the MAP test, and I was able to compare their data from before the 10 minutes of reading and after the 10 minutes of reading and see where those students were in the area of vocabulary acquisition. The study obviously took place here at Campbellsville Middle School. 8th grade language arts, it was a 6-week study. I used no resources outside of this building. No students participated that were not already in my classes, and no other resources, books, and things like that. Everything happened within the middle school building. Before I started my research, I wanted to do a little background to see if any other studies have been completed for 10 minutes of reading or silent sustained reading. So I did a little research. I found some literature reviews and they were very beneficial to me to see what I needed to do, what I didn't need to do, and how to get some data. Each piece of literature answers fundamental inquiries about the effectiveness of independent reading and its impact on student achievement, the organization of the approach, and the methods and strategies used to implement the program. The first piece of literature that I read was a journal, Out of the Shadow of Silent Sustained Reading, Real Teachers, Classroom Independent Reading Practices. This article was based on a study, kind of like the one that I completed, by the author to test the effectiveness of utilizing silent sustained reading in the classroom. The author concluded that when incorporated with all the right components, daily reading can affect student achievement positively. And the article also informed us of different ways that you can incorporate this into your classroom. My favorite quote from the article, it says, "Administrators, fellow teachers, colleagues, and support staff must be on board with the program. If they are not, the time you are taking out of your classroom can be detrimental." And that is something that I have learned within this process, is that everyone has to be on board, because if not, literally the 10 minutes can be a time wasted instead of a time invested. The next piece of literature that I looked at was an article or a study titled "Achievement Effects of Sustained Silent Reading in a Middle School." This was also another study that was completed on using the silent sustained reading in the classroom. And they actually completed their study for a year, which is something I would love to do because I think your results may be different. But their testing also showed significant post-treatment differences in gains for grades 6, 7, and 8, and for reading vocabulary specifically in grade 7. One of the statistics that they had, it said 94% of readers do as well or better than students who are not engaged in an independent reading program. The longer the program continues, the more consistent the results. I would love to continue this study next school year and do a year-long study. I've done it here on the last 6 weeks of school, so it's kind of been touch and go with schedule changes and activities and things like that. So I think we could get a better picture, but I still think that you're going to see a success from this. Secondary teacher perceptions of the advantages and disadvantages. So this study actually gave me some disadvantages to implementing the 10 minutes into the classroom and some of the negative things that could happen. But at the end of the study, regardless of the negative things that they had to fix, there were more positive outcomes. It also stated that when teachers assist students in the reading time, they see the more positive outcome. So, when students are doing the 10 minutes of reading, instead of me, grading papers or working on my computer, they recommended that I be reading. Bring in my favorite book, a magazine, newspaper, and read with my students. It sets a good example. Or to read with another student. If there's a student who is struggling to stay attentive and to read, pull that student up to your desk. They said that more positive outcomes when those things were applied. And the last one, making data-driven decisions. This one I really enjoyed because it gave me a lot of data, but it also told me how to apply, or how they applied that data within their study. They actually tested different practices between independent reading and silent sustained reading, and this was 3rd and 4th graders. So what I've learned also is that this is not just a strategy for middle school students. This can be incorporated into the elementary school, the high school, district-wide. Really, it can be an effective tool. But they use different things. They did teacher-student discussions. They took reading attitude inventory. They actually did reading response documents, test data, teacher observations, and all of those things put together, they were also able to see a growth in students when given this time. After my 6-week study was coming to a close, I began to collect data for my study that I completed. A lot of the things that I used to collect data were things that we already use within this building. I used MAP, which we all know we take 4 times a year, and it gives us an overall score and scores in different areas. I also use the Star Reader test. It's another great tool that we use through Accelerated Reader that gives me an overall score, but also gives me a vocabulary and lexile score. And then I also used observations, some things that I watch for during class. And then I allowed the students to take surveys at the end of the results. Something that you all know that we've been taught through the Leader in Me process is that student buy-in is very important. And so I wanted to give the students a chance to voice their opinion on the 10 minutes of reading, to see if they enjoyed it, did they feel like it helped them, and things like that. Mixed method data was used. So like I said, I used the 4 types of data, and those 4 types were broken down into qualitative data and quantitative data. This was my data collection process, and again, this is just kind of an overview of how the process worked. I won't lie, when I first started the process, I was very overwhelmed. There may have been a few moments of distress and tears, but when you look at it, when you set it down, when you put it in this outline, it is very simple, and I've learned that anyone can complete action research within their classroom and their school, and I'm actually really excited that this process has come and gone because I want us to be able to do some other action research projects as a school. But this was the biggest help to me whenever I started my project, because it allowed me to see a breakdown of things I needed to do, and it was kind of like a checklist. So my initial phase, the first thing that I had to do before I could do anything was gather baseline data, and that data was how my students were testing before I started to implement the strategy. I sent consent forms home with students. That is something that is very important as a part of action research, because students need to know that they are safe and secure, and they're not going to be asked to do anything that would harm them nor the process. I gave instructions to the students. We talked about the new strategy. We talked about what it would look like in class, and then I completed my research. That's when I looked at my literature pieces, best practices, what should I do, what should I not do, and things like that. That all took me about a week. The next was the implementation of the strategy. This is where we started to read 10 minutes each day in class. Student observations were completed, and I collected STAR data halfway through the process. I could not collect MAP data because it's only taken the 4 times, but I did have the opportunity to collect the STAR data halfway through. Data collection phase is where I collected growth data from MAP assessments. This was around our spring MAP testing window. So for 2 days I was able to collect that data, put it together, piece the pieces together, analyze it, and things like that. The interview phase is when students completed their student surveys. This was just last week. Students, school's coming down, the 6 weeks ended, and I said, okay, we've implemented this strategy. What did you all think about it? And they had the opportunity to tell me. And then the data analysis phase, which I've just really dug into and started to put together the beginning of this week. But I analyzed baseline data, I looked at the student surveys, I looked at the observation data, and I began to put all of those pieces together. This is what they call the triangulation of data, and it just shows how all the data pieces work together to get your overall results. And again, it tells the research question, what is the effect of implementing 10 minutes of daily reading on student achievement in the area of vocabulary acquisition? And then it gives a breakdown of the 4 pieces of data that I use and how that data works together to get the overall result. We talked about this when we talked about the consent form on the layout of the phases. Ethics, you have to make sure that you're not challenging anyone's ethics when you complete an action research project. There were no ethical challenges during the research. Steps were taken in the beginning, like the consent form, to ensure that all students and parents were aware of the study and the components. And this is just a look at the consent form. Ms. Rhodes and I looked over it before we sent it home, but it just tells parents, this is what our plan is, this is how it's going to work, and then them and their student could sign off on the consent. Now, this is the part that I'm really excited about. I've been really nervous the whole 5 weeks of the study because I thought I'm going to do this action research project and I'm not going to get positive results, which is not an expectation. You may not get positive results, but I was really crossing my fingers. I really wanted my students to do well. And so when I started putting these results together, I was very, very excited. During the 6-week period, I tracked academic scores of the experimental group and the control group. So remember, I had one group of students who were taking the 10 minutes of reading, and I also had students who were not doing the 10 minutes. To begin the study, they were administered the MAP progress test and the STAR reading test. This was to serve as their pre-test so that I could get the baseline data. They didn't know the questions, things like that. After giving that data, or giving that test and then giving it again at the end, I had the opportunity to conclude that implementing the 10 minutes of daily reading time had a positive impact on student achievement in the area of vocabulary acquisition. There was a greater increase in students' MAP and STAR reading scores from the pre-assessment to the post-assessment in the experimental group compared to the control group. 85% of students in my experimental group showed an increase in vocabulary acquisition. I was so excited. The kids were so excited. This 10 minutes that we had implemented had paid off. And it was so exciting to see, they wanted to know. They weren't even worried about their overall score. They wanted to know their vocabulary score because they wanted to know if this 10 minutes that they had been putting in every day was paying off, and it did. So that was really great to see. And my students in my control group, they also showed gains. So I'm not saying that if you don't implement this time that you won't see gains, because they did see a gain, but not near as large. They only showed a 25% gain in the area of vocabulary acquisition. This is just a look at the pre-test results of the experimental group at the top. If you look, their pre-test results average in vocabulary acquisition was a 215. And if you look at the post-test, their average score was a 221. So on average, we were increasing vocabulary scores by 6 points. The control group, their average pre-test score was a 212, and their average post-test was a 214. So again, they were increasing, but not just they weren't seeing a gain like the experimental group did. Post-test results. Again, this is the same chart. It shows your pre-test and post-test. Like I said, 85% of the students in the experimental group showed a gain, and only 25% in the control group showed a gain. So we definitely are seeing more progress with those students who are getting that 10 minutes of reading. This was a look at the observation results. This is something that we haven't talked a lot about, but something that I did while students were reading was I kind of was the observer. I wanted to see were students on task, were they doing what they were asked to do, and things like that. So I focused my data. I watched all students, but there were 4 students in my experimental group that I really focused my data on. And when I was watching them, I looked for things like wandering eyes, out of seat, talking, off task, sleeping, fidgeting, and book closed. And you can see here I have mapped, how many times, I saw them do one of those things. And then here are their scores. So I wanted to see, okay, they've been off task, they've been doing these things. Are they still showing any kind of improvement? So if you look at their data, student number 1 stayed the same. Student 2, pre-test to post-test, only grew by 1 point. Student 3 grew by 2 points, and student 4 also grew by 1 point. So they're still growing, but they didn't see an average gain like the rest of their students. So this is something that if I were going to implement this into my classroom starting next school year, I would want to have a plan for. Because you all know that there's days that students come in, they're not on task, they're not in the right mindset, they don't have things with them. So how do we overcome those obstacles for them to be able to still get their 10 minutes that they need so that we can see those gains? Student survey results. there were 3 multiple choice questions that I looked at. Question number 1 asked students, did you enjoy the 10 minutes of reading time? And if you look, 14 of the students said yes, like we really enjoyed the time. Question number 2 asked them, do you think that this helped you improve in the area of vocabulary? This was before that they saw their MAP scores, and 17 said yes, I think that it has helped me improve. And then question number 3, would you like us to continue doing something like this? Do you think that it's something that we should continue to do and all of this? 9 said yes, so it was a little bit lower number. Some of the students made side comments on their surveys and said things like, I love this, but can we do it this way instead? So even though they may have not answered A, they had other suggestions that they would like to see. After a thorough analysis of the 3 sources of data, I concluded that 10 minutes of daily reading time does have a positive impact on student achievement in the area of vocabulary acquisition. The pre-test and post-test data indicated that while both groups did increase their scores, the experimental group had a more positive outcome. Their scores increased more than the scores from the control group, which led the researcher to determine that the 10 minutes of daily reading time did have a positive impact. The observation data and student survey results also showed a positive outcome for the study. When discussing the results, I think there are several things that we have to take into consideration. I got really excited, I was ready to celebrate, and then I thought, okay, you also got to take a step back and look at some things that you could have done differently or things that could have impacted your study. Some of those things, even though we saw an increase, some of the limitations that I saw, the first one, the biggest one out of all of them, is that this took place at the end of the school year. You all know as well as I do that it's crazy, and there's field day, and activities, and schedule changes, and kids aren't here, and they're going on field trips. So that was my biggest limitation. I would have students who wouldn't be here for 2 or 3 days. I would have students who would be here for the first half of class, but not the last half of class, and so it made things difficult. I said in order to fully understand whether this time is truly effective, because my 6-week study did show a positive outcome and an increase in scores, but to get a better view of this, I would love to see a year-long study completed when students start in August, end in May, and then that way we can kind of see the ups and downs of the school year and, you know, consistency and things like that. This study, like I said at the beginning, there's so many administrators who have tried to disprove this strategy. This study definitely proves that it works when done correctly. Administrators across the U.S. have said that this time is a waste and an easy out for teachers. Again, this has proved that it can be healthy for our students to have this time. Students who are several grade levels behind in reading are making small comebacks and showing improvements in areas where they have not shown improvements before. This study showed that even the small moments can have a major impact on the achievement of students. And this line from my MARP, my paper that I have to write, it has stuck with me, and I want to put it in my classroom somewhere because I am so guilty of saying, oh, we've only got 5 minutes left. Oh, we've only got 6 minutes left. Do this. But it's those small moments and those little bits of time that we have that can make a major difference for our students. I also noticed in the 6 weeks that students became motivated to read because I was letting them read what they wanted. Students who are into sports weren't asked to read about history, and students who were into history weren't asked to read about sports, so they were truly reading things that they enjoyed. I have learned so much from this 6-week study, and I would love for us to be able to take a few minutes to discuss how we as a district, we as a building, we as a staff could maybe start to implement this into our building slowly. And so I just want to take a few minutes. You can talk to the person beside of you. You can take notes, whatever. And then I know it's the end of the school year. I know that everybody's ready to go. So I'm not going to talk about today, but after you finish talking, you can leave it. That way I can kind of look through it and kind of get a plan of where we need to go. next year. Again, thank you so much for staying and listening to me present. If you have any questions, I would love to talk to you afterward. Again, I highly encourage you to do some type of action research. It is very eye-opening and was very beneficial to me as a teacher. So thank you guys. Hope you have a great summer.